Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Happy Model Mobula7 1S HD, and it's using pretty much all the same parts that we saw originally in the Mobula7, but don't get it confused, they're both analog, neither one of these is digital. This one has an onboard recording, so the big part of the picture you're going to see in all the flight videos, that's recorded on here. That's not what we see in our goggles. That's important to note so no one gets confused. The parts that we have are very the same, except for there's two different parts on this one, which is obviously that big giant camera right there. You see that lens up there? It's trying to focus on my face. Let's block it with another quad. So there's a big camera difference, and also this one has a gyro logger on the bottom. It's kind of just stuck in there, and that is where you have an SD card, and it will store its gyro data on that, and you can use that in GyroFlow. I am no expert in GyroFlow. If you're not familiar with GyroFlow, that is a free or open source application that you can use gyro data to stabilize HD recording type footage. Again, I'm not an expert, so I'm not going to focus on that in this particular video. I'm just going to fly and have some fun. So just like in the original, it has these RS0802 20,000 kV motors. These motors do have a 1.5 inch motor shaft, which makes them much more durable. It's also got these propellers that are 40 millimeter, and they also have that hole in there. They're bi-blades, by the way, that will go over that 1.5 millimeter shaft. The flight controller down in here is the X12 V2 if you get the ELRS edition, which is Express LRS. If you get the FR Sky edition, you'll have much less range. You'll probably be able to cover the same sort of spaces like my backyard, but not a whole lot more, and that is considered version 1 of the flight controller, which does feature an open VTX of 400 milliwatts, so that is quite a new benchmark in all-in-one flight controllers. It also has a 12 amp ESC, so we should have more ESC overhead, and we should burn them less often. Of course, the RunCam Split 3 Lite is our FPV camera that is featured, and back over here where you see my SD card, that is the SD card slot. It also has a button over here on the other side. You press that to stop or start, although it is set to record on power up. So that's already set up. And in the bottom, as I already shown you, but a little closer look here, black box logger, no button or anything on that. I did lose my SD card, and I found the footage where I lost that SD card, so I'll show that for some fun in the video. We also get this parallel or series charging board, so you can charge 4 PH20 batteries off a standard hobby grade charger, and this does have a PH20 connector for our battery purposes. Of course, you could always change that, and eventually you will have to change that, maybe after 100 flights or 200 flights. We know these break down over time. We also get a spare set of props. We get a prop remover, an extra little assortment of screws down here for our canopy and motors, and a screwdriver. And we also get a one-page full color manual on the quad, as well as battery charging. And last but not least, stickers. On my scale, with one of the two SD cards inserted, it weighs just a touch over 33 grams. In my flight experience, I use primarily these two batteries here. We've got the Xylo on top. They're both 450 milliamp and the G&B on the bottom. But note, there is a size difference between these two batteries. So either one is probably underrated for the milliamp, or one is overrated. One of the two. With the Xylo 450 1S battery, it weighs 47.25 grams. With the G&B 450 milliamp 1S battery, it weighs 46.25 grams. So 1 gram difference between those batteries. And motor post to motor post, I'm getting about 75 millimeters as we expect. Before we get started the flight, it's very likely that if you buy one of these, you may not get an MPU 6000 chip on yours, which is a chip we've been using a lot in our all-in-ones as well as other flight controllers. You may have one of the other chips on your board, and I do in this particular case. And one of the things that I learned through that process was the other chips are more susceptible to vibrations. So we need to make sure that our gummies are able to absorb as many of those vibrations as we can, so we don't want to have the canopy compressed. So if you find you have real bouncy or unsmooth flight, a half turn at a time, turn your screws, loosen that canopy a half turn at a time, give it a test fly. If it's still choppy, another half turn, and keep working that way. You shouldn't have to turn it too much. We just want to loosen that flight controller up enough to where those gummies can absorb that vibration. So we're jumping right into a cruisy sort of flight, and this is a quad that's going to be for those that are maybe wanting to do a primarily sort of smooth sort of flight. You want that HD recording, you want a small form factor, you want prop guards for possible safety precautions. You know, you don't want to bump into anyone. And one of the things that you'll notice in my flight footage, this has got 14 mile an hour winds, and when we're out here in the middle between the houses and down the road, we have more of that 14-mile-an-hour wind that is hitting the quad. So we see some vibrations, some call it jello. We also have a full sunlight day, so an ND filter on a day like this would probably be very necessary and possibly help us with a lot of those small vibrations. As we get into some of the shadier areas around the back side of the yard, you may notice that some of those waves in the footage, those go away. Of course, if you go inside, I'll have a flight inside that's more fast, more aggressive, which is kind of what I enjoy the most about FPV. You'll see that the footage is much different as far as how much of that shake in the image that you see. Of course, we have that logger so that we can use that data as well as GyroFlow to help assist us in smoothing out the footage as much as we possibly can. This is probably also the first time that you all have seen kind of higher definition footage of the backyard, but it's not very current because this was one of my first flights on this particular quad. I spent most of my time flying it more aggressively, and you'll see that a little later in the video. You almost get to see a progression in the backyard to a certain degree. But this one has, the one I'm flying has Express LRS, so I have outstanding control link range, more than I'll probably ever need, and we have 400 milliwatts of VTX, which is really, really good. But you will fly further than your VTX will support. Obviously, in this particular cruising video, it's easy for me to get more than 100 meters out and get a big house between me and the quad. So depending upon your environment, range is going to vary, but you're very likely going to lose your video well before you ever lose your control link. And also, this does have a microphone on board, although it's not very pleasing to the ears. It can hurt your ears quite a bit. I'm going to reduce the volume level before I give you a sample to a level that might be tolerable, but I think it's important to note that it does have a microphone on board. What you're currently hearing and what you'll hear in the rest of the flight footage is not from that microphone. It's from a secondary camera that I set near me, so you can hear what the quad sounds like when it's flying as far as perspective of what you hear and what others hear. So here's a little bit of that motor noise recorded on board through the HD recording. Okay, that should be more than enough as we circle the backyard again here. Hopefully that didn't hurt your ears too much, but you might be able to do certain things like put a piece of tape over the microphone to mute it a little bit. You might get much better sound. You might decide to put a piece of foam on underneath the tape. You might try just foam. So different techniques to help sort out and maybe increase the quality of the microphone recording. With micros, you know, our motors don't necessarily sound real good. All right, let's go back inside and let's do our fun aggressive flight. All right, we're going to get started on our inside flight, and in the lower right-hand corner, that is our FPV view or our goggle view. And this flight is going to run 3 minutes and 32 seconds, I believe, according to my notes. And I should mention, because I didn't show it on the screen, the cruisy flight outside in that 14-mile-an-hour wind went for 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Again, on a 450 milliamp battery. I can't say if it was the Xylo or the G&B, though, because I just kind of used them interchangeably, and I failed to note that on that particular flight. Well, I had a few cruisy flights. I think at the time, because it was day one, I didn't know if I was going to use it or not. So this is going to be my more typical flight, where I just like to zoom around, kind of the pod racer or speeder racer sort of Star Warsy sort of flying, where I just feel like it's more fun for me to zoom by stuff and to circle them at speed. You might call it racing too, I guess. I guess I said racing a few times. But really my goal is to see how capable it is in order to manage flight inside. Of course, many times people look at my house and they think, oh, it'd be so nice to have a house that big. You don't need a big house to whoop. You just don't. In the nighttime, I whoop downstairs only because I try to not disturb everybody else who's sleeping. All my family goes to bed well before I do. Of course, I'm up doing this late at night. So I fly in the basement. The basement's going to be about 900 square feet. Sometimes I'll get gates out, and you guys have seen the gates on the channel a few times, and I'll fly through those gates. Of course, I'm much slower when I'm having to hit those gates or when I'm trying to hit those gates. So you don't have to have a large space. Of course, if you're wanting to do different tricks, whether it's some sort of Matty flip or power loop, it helps to have the right sort of flow in your house and stairs in those particular cases. Our house is laid out well for not only just being able to zoom around, but it's also laid out well for reception. I should note that my reception isn't as good if I sit in the basement and then I fly on the second level. My reception also isn't as good if I sit in one of the other rooms. If you can't see me, I am sitting at the kitchen table by that bay window as we go into the kitchen area. So you should be able to see me. That's where I'm sitting. That's where I found my best reception is. I fly raceband 8, which gets us up above the Wi-Fi in the house, so I don't have to turn off my Wi-Fi. Our Wi-Fi isn't terribly new. I'd say it's got to be 4 or 5 years old. It's one of the mesh networks, and we have a couple of different access points or repeaters set out in each level of the house. So that gives you some idea about reception. Of course, at 400 milliwatts inside, as long as your house is not constructed of cement, you should be fine inside. Of course, if you have metal studs, aluminum studs are sometimes used in construction. Those will probably give you some multipathing. But I don't know how bad it is. I'm not aware of having flown in a house that has used aluminum or metal studs before. So that's something to note. And here at the end of my flight, my older kids will be getting home, and so you'll get a look at her and the look on her face as she comes home and she sees that, oh, Dad's home and he's flying again. Yes, I took a late lunch, and so I did my flight. It should be noted also, whenever you add weight to a whoop, that can hurt your durability. It also obviously hurts your agility and flight time as well. But if you're looking at this, you're wanting that HD recording. To my knowledge, there's not a lighter weight way of getting it. The camera is fairly exposed. There's not much camera protection, and there's not much a manufacturer can do about that because of the wide angle and the large lens. So something else to be aware of is that your camera is sticking well out there, and it may be problematic. Here we go. We're going to end that flight again. That was 3 minutes and 22 seconds.
What? What's so funny?
Oh, just a look on your face.
What?
Okay, so here's going to be a more aggressive outside flight. It actually wasn't intended to be used in the video. I thought I had done this more than a dozen times, but I either misplaced the footage or I hadn't. Maybe I got confused. Maybe I was flying something else. So at this point, my mental state in flying was I was just out after work having fun. I'd gotten the kids where they needed to be. I had, an hour and a half or some sort of time to where I could come home and fly, and there was very little wind. It was nice and comfortable. So I just had these batteries charged up, so I came home and fly. So we're going to see... it's just a bit different than my normal video. I have one pretty solid crash in this, and I think that's something else I should highlight. This new V4 of the Mobula7 frame is not only more durable, but it's also more stiff. So that should help us. Oh, that was a pretty bad crash. Right into that 2x4. Also, this is closer to the current state of the backyard, although the roof over the outdoor area has actually been fully roofed as far as the OBS, the sheeting on it, as well as sheeting. It's ready for shingles. I think we have one more wall that needs to be built for the storage area in the outdoor space, and then we have the framing inspectors come back out and before we can move on with electrical and finishing out the construction phase, the wood construction phase. So at this night, I'm just out having fun, just kind of zooming around this new little space because I know eventually it's going to be kind of locked in. And yeah, I did do some dives through the slats in the roof support structures. And I got it the very first time, and I'll show you this kind of a picture-in-picture back of the desk if you're interested. I did it the first time, but I crashed every other time after that. It was kind of ridiculous. Matter of fact, this is not my first flight this particular evening, because my first flight, I was crashing into so many different things because I was really out of sorts. I really wasn't aware of where stuff was, where my gaps were, how I needed to approach the things, like those 2x4s sitting on those sawhorses, as well as that black trash can on the other side of those. So something else that needs to be highlighted is if you do punch outs and dives with this, it will wash out. You might not have seen it really, but if you watch very closely on the larger punch outs that I've done in this video, that it will want to at the bottom. It's kind of turns. If you're not familiar with the washout, it's kind of an uncontrolled flight characteristics that in whoops we look for as a flight flaw that we need to be aware of. It happens in a lot of whoops, so it's not necessarily making a product bad or deformative, but it's actually kind of rare that it doesn't happen. With this particular one, if you're doing relatively short dives and you haven't gone up to a great deal of height and you're coming down, it doesn't do it very dramatically, but you could tell it wants to. So my thought is if you were to go pretty high, higher than I am, that the likelihood that you'll see a washout is probable. and I slid down the slide, which is oftentimes something that gets requested quite often on the channel. I don't know why I did it. Again, I wasn't in kind of a review state of mind. I was just out getting some more flights. I had some charged batteries and taking advantage of the really nice weather. I completely didn't see that squirrel. Oh, yeah, another crash. Wanged it right off of that metal structure there. No harm, no foul. We've pretty much finished the flight, and we're going to come into the table and hover for a second. Note those trees in the distance. They're barely even moving. Very still night, very rare for where I live. So this is a little bit more footage from that night. Also, it's worth noting, you know, not full sun, and I see very, very smooth video. I know it's hard to study because I'm going a lot faster. So that gives you another point of reference as far as the capabilities of the camera and recording smooth video, is that if you don't have that full sun, which that first flight I showed you was kind of the classic, dive and didn't pull out. And see, there's the SD card. Oh, let's go back. I'll freeze it right here. See the SD card in the top left-hand corner? That's where it fell out. And I didn't know it had fallen out by that point. So it was lost in the wind and the construction. But we turtle mode over, and I continue to fly around. I do several more dives and crashes through those slats in the roof. It was a good time, and you see my camera moved as well. My camera angle adjusted down on that crash. So right now I'm just kind of doing some rolls to see, are we sound? Do we need to bring it in? What's the status here? I'm, of course, flying kind of weird. It's mainly because the camera angle is so far off. It's almost like at 0 degrees or maybe even negative a degree or two. So my flight isn't very good from this point. But I wanted to show you that SD card popping out. Something you need to be aware of, and something that I thought was a little bit comical because this, you know, wasn't intended to be seen by the world. This was just me having fun. I didn't mention it to start off with, but damage report. The damage report I've already shown you. The SD card popped out and went away. But everything else is sound. It's fine. I haven't seen a single crack in not just the canopy, but the frame. Everything works to this day. You know, be aware of these wires as you fly and as you enjoy. If you have one or decide to purchase one of these wires, we want to make sure they stay inside the structure of this whoop so our props don't come by and snap them off. So if you've had a crash or you've been out for a flying session, check those. Take something that's, you know, non-conductive is always my preference, something plastic, or, you know, maybe even a twig from where you're flying, and just kind of push those back behind this whoop to make sure it doesn't go behind it, but behind it as far as the depth goes. Make sure those wires stay safe and sound. Again, we have our SD card over here. This is our antenna for our VTX over here. It comes all the way around from down there. Isn't that the VTX? Well, we have this antenna that comes down around because it connects below the board for the camera recording board. I don't see any damage really on there might be some scuffs or scratches up here on the edge of the camera lens. But as I mentioned, there's really no camera protection. You've got that big lens out there. That's just kind of something you have to deal with when it comes to HD recording. At least it's not a $500 or $800 GoPro. With the motors being 1.5 millimeter motor shafts, that's another feature where your durability will be increased. Over previous iterations of these 0802 motors, we'd see 1 millimeter motor shafts, and even in a prop protected configuration, you do have the potential, that you could bend or even snap off a motor shaft on some of those harder crashes. The button to start and stop recordings is right over here. I mentioned that previously. This is a control board. It does not come with a control board, so if you want to change settings on the camera, you will have to get a control board. It doesn't have to be specific to this camera. Really, any of those control boards will allow you to. It's just a 2-pin connector there. I don't know that there's much you want to change. Last time I remember having one of these cameras, there's not a lot of features in there to change. But, you know, maybe there's something in there that you want to investigate. If you have questions about that, please let me know. I have older videos on these sort of cameras from back in the day that you may be able to reference those videos in order to learn about the different settings that you can change on these particular cameras. So it records automatically. When you power up, you get a little red dot that flashes in your DVR, and then you stop it with that. It's pretty fun, and for 1S and HD flying, I was impressed. But I understand that, you know, analog and HD recording on board isn't going to be for everyone, but if it is for you, we do have this option. Last thing I'll note before we wrap up, we've got this foam pad up here. We still have a 3-position mount, which is not my favorite, but they put this foam in there probably to dampen any vibrations or to at the very least, to keep it from hitting the board itself on those crashes where we come in upside down, or I guess if you go up and you hit the canopy on something else. So we've got a little bit of foam in there. Make sure as you're flying you keep that foam or another replacement piece of foam in there. I wouldn't encourage you to fly it without the foam in there. The last thing to talk about with the Mobula7 1S HD is the price, of course. There's only 2 resellers I see at this time, one being Makerfire, one being Banggood. I've got coupon codes to save you a little bit of cash down in the video description along with their links. I see Makerfire is listing this for $179 and Banggood is listing it for $169, both the ELRS versions or Express LRS versions. You may see that price fluctuate, especially down the line. It could go up. Unfortunately, everything is going up. You know, inflation, chip shortages, shipping shortages, stock market is all mad at everything. But that's the price of the Mobula7 1S HD from Happy Model. If you do have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching.